the fourth topic in the key skills that at Satkaam we keep talking about with regards to um, Hi, guys. We'll start in a couple of minutes. For people who are online, I just wanted to do a quick check. If you could give me an indication that you can hear me, either by giving a thumbs up or typing out into the chat window that my voice is coming through. The other tip is if you have the chance to go live, or to forward it to going live, you probably want to click that so that you don't get too far behind in terms of the buffering that YouTube does. So, any indication about whether you're able to hear me or not? That'll be great. Thanks. Okay, it is 2 p.m. On a Saturday afternoon, September 13th. Welcome to all of you who have joined in. I realize this is a bit of a challenge trying to keep you guys awake on a Saturday afternoon, but do appreciate you guys joining in. We're going to get started. Again, I just mentioned it a couple of minutes ago, but if you do have the option to click on kind of go live on your YouTube window, do that so that you're not getting buffered up too much, and we can have an interaction more, live versus delayed. So, anyways, let's get going, and hopefully we'll see a fair amount of interaction from all of you. Hello everyone. Today we are going to be picking up the fourth topic in the key skills that at Satkaam we keep talking about with regards to what is needed for a successful career, right? So, to summarize, if you remember, we talked of developing critical thinking, the ability to be a good problem solver. The third one was really curiosity and inquisitiveness, right? And then the final one is something that we call articulation, and there's obviously also the term communication that we use often. Okay, hello everyone. Today's topic is about something called as articulation and communication. And for people who remember, we started with saying that there are really four key skills that are extremely critical and extremely important out of, obviously hundreds of others, that will kind of determine your success in life and in your career, right? And if you remember, they were the ability really to develop critical thinking, curiosity and inquisitiveness, being a great problem solver. And the final one that we are going to talk about today is about having good articulate skills, right? So let's kind of jump into it. And this is kind of the agenda that we are going to follow. Again, this topic has been broken up into four different sets, and we'll get more detailed as well in the coming semesters, right? But today, let's start first with. There's obviously kind of a confusion about, the difference kind of between communication and articulation. And we'll start over there to try and make sure we all understand what that difference is, right? So first, let's kind of begin by maybe a show of hands. for everybody who's online right now. How many of you think or know that you can communicate, right? So let's pause and get a show of hands and kind of take this discussion forward. So, if you think you can communicate, just go ahead and type, yes, or whatever you feel like in the chat window, and we'll see. The funny thing is actually, even if you don't type yes, you are actually communicating something, right? You're communicating that Saturday afternoons are not ideal for listening to a class of this kind. But so be it. So please go ahead and we'll go from there. Okay, so even though not everybody probably raised their hands or said yes, what we need to realize is that every single one of us knows and is communicating all the time, right? Even if you didn't raise your hand, even if you didn't say anything, you're actually communicating, right? Maybe you're communicating that, you know what, I am least interested in this topic. I would rather be somewhere else, maybe in the college canteen with my friends, than listening to this particular lecture. But 24 by 7, whenever we are there, we are communicating, right? Maybe we may not all be good communicators, right? But as is listed down over here, there are various ways, right, that you are communicating. Maybe you are saying something, maybe you're just keeping quiet, maybe there's written communication, there's kind of body language that's happening, right? And essentially, because we are communicators, right? And there are this list of 3 questions that we have over here that kind of test out our communication skills, right? So, for instance, right, if we were to say, ask you a question, what is your hobby, or which sports do you play, right? That's a very easy question. And I'm going to pause again for us to actually do some interaction with you to get some answers on these 3 questions over here. So, and you can pick any of the 3, whichever you feel comfortable with. But each and every one of you should have an answer on at least one, if not all 3, right? They are fairly straightforward, simple questions. If somebody comes and asks you, what is your hobby, or what sports do you like to play, or, what was the last movie that you saw, or what was the last vacation or trip that you took? These are all fairly straightforward, simple questions. And as long as you're able to answer this, right, you are able to communicate, right? So hoping to see some answers from some of you to any of these questions, actually. As you probably observed, right, when questions are fairly simple and easy, right, all of us are able to communicate back our answers, right? Like what is some sports that you like, or what is it that you do, or what are your hobbies, or which was the movie that you liked. So when the questions are easy and the answers are known to you, you can communicate back almost everybody over here without a problem, right? So that's our ability to communicate, right? So now let's get into so why do you need to be articulate, or what is that difference, right? And before we go ahead, let's take this simple quiz to kind of make sure all of you are engaged over here. So we have this question over here, right? Which is that what is the primary difference between verbal and non-verbal communication, right? What I would like to see happen is, depending on what you think is the right answer, type that into the chat window, right? So if you think it is A, which is that verbal communication uses words while non-verbal communication uses body language. If you think it's B, which is that verbal communication is more effective than non-verbal communication, you type in B. If you think it's C, non-verbal communication is always subconscious, which is you don't think about it or realize it. Or if it is D, which is that verbal communication is only used in formal settings, right? Now remember, the question is the primary difference, which is what is the main difference between verbal and non-verbal communication, right? And yeah, looks like most of you are getting it, right? It is indeed A, which is the main difference is that, obviously verbal communication is using language and words, while non-verbal is things where you don't speak, but people can observe it, right? Because they're looking at how you are reacting. Maybe on your face there's a reaction, or how your body and hands and legs are responding, right? So great, thanks for those answers. So we got the answer of that, right? And as we've talked about, before we go into kind of communication and articulation differences, most of us, and especially people who kind of come from, either an engineering background or technology background, have this fear that we are not good communicators, right? And I'm going to play a video over here to demonstrate a pretty poor communication skill. And believe me, this is a very common sight, a very common criteria that is actually.
Morning everyone, welcome to Bay Park Hospital.
So this video is that of a hospital. There is a safety officer who is coming in and talking to all the new employees who have joined the hospital, right? What I would like for you to do is pay attention, watch the video, listen in to what he's talking about in terms of introduction to safety at the hospital, and then try and identify what you think is wrong, or what are the mistakes that he is making in his communication style. Okay?
I'm your OC Health and Safety Officer, and they've asked me to kick off your induction training by giving you a short talk about safety. Now I want you to pay particular attention to the safety rules because we have an excellent record of health and safety here. In the last 2 years, we have managed to lower LTIFRs, and we certainly want to keep it that way. So Anton, Carlos, when your supervisor tells you to wear your PPEs, make sure you wear them, especially the earmuffs if you're driving the L4000 polisher, okay? Because that's got a noise level of about 90 dBA, and I think you'll agree that's pretty rowdy. Now, if you have to use any chemicals in the place, cleaning agents and so on, make sure you read the appropriate MSDS form thoroughly before you decant them. Now, you'll find one in the HasChem storehouse behind lower level 9. Now, Megan, I believe you'll be spending a lot of time in front of the VD unit accounts. Make sure you take 5 every hour or so because we don't want any RSI complaints, okay? Now, all of you will be lifting boxes and other equipment during your stay here. I want you to remember to use your legs and not your backs when you're lifting. And if something looks too heavy, ask for help. There are no prizes for heroes around here. And it goes for you nurses too. When lifting patients, use the sling. That's what we bought it for. Now, finally, all of you, please, no horseplay, no skylarking around. Now, I usually have to tell that to the younger blokes, and you do look like a slightly more sensible lot. So, hope you enjoy your stay at Bay Park, and remember, if there's any queries about OH&S, my door's always open. I'm on 7B, or you can check with your HSR for your DWG. And remember, safety is everyone's baby.
All right, so based on what you heard and what you saw, just list down in the chat window what you think are, problems that you noticed as he was giving this talk, right? And as I mentioned earlier, this is a fairly common occurrence where the company or the hospital felt like, we are welcoming all the new people, we are giving them a brief, quick introduction of all the various departments, right? And so they will get to know about things in the hospital fairly easily, and so they'll be able to start working very clearly going forward. So what were the challenges? What were the things that you saw which weren't right according to you? Okay, Rutika says he is being dominating boss. Okay, Meet says safety and communication, pronunciation and accent issues for others. There's a one-way communication. Awesome. That's a good take. Whether he is saying, right? He's not really, asking or trying to make it interactive. It seems like he's just coming in, and it feels like he's being forced to come in. What else? What other things did you notice? Chintan says he was not interacting. True. Very true. Right. What else? Okay, Adi says not exactly motivating and welcoming, and did not read the room. Right. Very good point. Right. Yeah, reading the room. That's a skill that you need to develop. Right. Ganesh says that he's talking continuously without any pause, and he doesn't give others a chance. Okay. In a way, he isn't appearing. Okay, good. So a lot of you have a lot of thoughts, right? Um, he was obviously, and I think a lot of the things that you've said over here are apt and right? The other thing that you might have noticed was that he was using a lot of jargons, right? Jargons are short forms or acronyms that people who work in the hospital probably will know, right? I think he said something like LTTR or something like that, right? Imagine a new employee who is joining the company, right? They have no idea what LTTR means. Or if he says, meet me at 7B, right? What is 7B? Where is it, right? He's obviously being aggressive. His body language, right? He takes his feet and puts it up on the chair, showing very very demanding and very aggressive style, so to say, right? And yeah, as some of you are saying, right, he really didn't do a proper introduction. Could have could have tried to make the new employees feel welcome, asking them to introduce themselves, right? So a lot of problems, right? But as I said, believe it or not, this is not like very rare situation, right? So and it is your job to try and learn from the mistakes that other people may be making, right? As well as learning from people who might be exceptionally good at this particular skill, right? So hopefully you've realized, and will never make any of the mistakes that he was making over here whenever the opportunity presents itself to you. Okay? All right, let's continue. What do you think was, were So, what do you think were the problems that kind of were in this short demonstration or introduction being done by the safety officer to, as it seems like, new employees who are joining the hospital? Right. Let's pause. Let's have a discussion. Let's hear you out. Yeah, as I mentioned, kind of honestly, this is not surprising, right? In fact, almost in most companies across the world, this is a very common incident or event that is happening, right? And some of you talked about this. Hopefully, you got what was absolutely wrong, right? Every company has this huge list of jargons that only people who've been in the company for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years understand it, but we forget who the audience is. It's new employees. They've probably it's their first day. They don't know or understand most of the things. So you talking in jargons that other employees probably are familiar with, right? And so when you use LTTR, everybody else understands, but a new employee obviously doesn't, right? His inability to kind of interact with the audience, kind of get them to introduce themselves, the way he was standing confidently, putting his leg on the chair. He obviously wasn't unable to, gauge the audience reaction. The fact that, people were rolling their eyes, were looking up and looking at each other, were clear indications that none of them was really either understanding or, had lost interest and were paying attention to what he was saying. And this, if you think about it from the company's standpoint, right, is a very important thing, especially in a hospital, right? You're talking about safety in a hospital, right? But the manager who came in probably feels, oh, I've already done a briefing with all the new employees, so they understand, what safety is in our hospital, right? But as you can imagine, that really is not the case, right? And as I said, this is a very common phenomena. Most companies feel that when new employees join, if they do like a 1-day induction program, the employees have gotten familiar and should know everything, right? So anyway, so this was a classic example of what is not good communication. Yeah. And so let's move. Before we move on, I just noticed somebody was asking, what does jargon mean, right? So jargon is like, either very technical words, either acronyms, short forms, special words that only a few set of people, because they have been working together or studying in the same college, they might be familiar with, right? It's not a very commonly used term across the world which everybody will understand, right? So for instance, a common jargon that everybody understands is like FYI, right? For your information. I think when you use FYI, everybody anywhere in the world kind of understands that it means for your information. But if somebody says, MTTB, mean time, or MB, whatever, mean time between failure, right? And in that company, instead of saying mean time between failures, they use MTBF, right? Now, that is not something that a new person who goes into that company is going to understand, right? And so jargons are these special words or that have been coined in a particular workplace that people who work together for a long time understand it, while new people have difficulty understanding it, right? Move on now to what is articulation, right? And what we've done obviously over here is kind of like the textbook definition, right? And where would you say that articulation is needed? And this is kind of a very good examples that we have over here of what is the big difference, right? We said if somebody asks you what are your hobbies, it's very easy to communicate back, right? But when somebody asks you, why do you like that, right? Or why did you like a particular movie, or why did you not like a particular movie, right? Then we are getting into the situation where you have to explain your thoughts, right? And it is not just stating the facts, it is actually questioning your thinking, your thought process. It kind of forces you to reflect on what you like, why you don't like. And when you have to express those thoughts about why something doesn't resonate with you, you better be, a good articulate person if you want to make an impression with the other person, right? So the big difference is really communicate is just, you need to be a good communicator or a communicator when you have to state the facts or state back something that you already know. But when you have to explain things that are not easy to understand, right? There, having the ability to articulate yourself well becomes super critical, right? And hopefully maybe you've paused and had a discussion about some of these as well, but hopefully you also understood the need, right? And I think in one of our previous slides we talked about this. We had it, we didn't talk about it. Was literally in today's day and age, there isn't a single profession where you don't need to be a good articulate person, right? Let's say a lot of technical people have this misconstrued notion that, I'm a technologist, I'm going to become a technical architect, and so it doesn't matter, right? And that's absolutely false and absolutely wrong, right? Why do you think that's wrong? Let me pause there and see, why do you think that a person who's really a technical architect doesn't manage a single person still need to be articulate? Yeah, so hopefully you've discussed and kind of realized that doesn't matter what, right? Because even for the technical architect, it's important to explain their decisions, their design, their vision, and so on, right? Let's again take a quick pause over here. And so, what do you think again? Let's type in A, B, C, or D into the chat window, depending on what we think is the right answer. The question is, why is articulation important in effective communication, right? And the choices are A, because it helps to avoid misunderstandings. B is because it makes the speaker sound more intelligent. Is it C, that it is only necessary in public speaking? Or is it D, that it is not important in written communication? Why do you think articulation is important in effective communication, right? And yeah, most of these questions are fairly simple and straightforward, so I'm happy to see everybody is attempting and getting it right. The answer is indeed A, which is that articulation can help to avoid misunderstandings between people. And let's engage in this Q&A. Okay, so now why is it important to have good articulation skills, right? See, in your life, and especially for people who have aspirations to do exceptionally well in your career, right? You want to be a force to be contended with, right? You want your manager to trust you. You want your leadership to say, you know what? No, I want this engineer to go and present to the customer. I want to put him or her up to explain what our company's goal and direction is, right? You want the ability to kind of dance people to your tunes based on your words, right? We all know that people in the world who have a way with words, right, are able to get people to follow them, right? You want to be a master of your tongue to be able to make people really follow you because you have this innate ability, right? And it doesn't matter what profession you are, right? For success, you will see that leaders in companies who are able to express their thoughts and vision will have a much better following amongst their employees, with their customers, right? and it doesn't matter what role you are going to be playing, right? You don't want people to lose out or ignore when you are talking, right? Your career growth depends on it. And even outside of when you're doing presentation, right? When you're talking to people, you want the opposite side to feel like, oh, let me listen to this person. He or she seems very interesting. They are able to put thoughts into words which are very appealing, right? And you don't want to reach a stage where even if you have a good idea, just because of the lack of your ability to express your ideas, people stop listening to you as soon as you start speaking, right? And in the end, if you are not articulate, right, what are you? You're going to be awkward, right? You're going to be a person who people just tune off when you start speaking, right? Versus an articulate person is extremely graceful with words, and that's what you want to be, right? I know as engineers, we sometimes, when we hear people from marketing or sales talk, we are like, oh, that's just, marketing stuff, right? But let's face it, right? If you are selfish, if you want to succeed, you better learn this skill. And as we've said in the past, right, the good news over here is that this isn't a skill that people are born with. It is a skill that can be learned. It is a skill that requires a lot of effort. It is a skill where you have to put in a lot of time. It is a skill that you have to practice and practice and practice to get better. But the good news is that anybody who puts in the effort will be able to develop the skill, which is so important for your growth. All right, let's take another quick pause and do this Q&A. So let's get going. What does the term articulation refer to? Is it A, speaking quickly without any thought? Is it B, the clarity and effectiveness of expressing your ideas? Is it C, which is using complex jargon, which we had explained what jargon means a while ago? Or is it D, which is just basically articulation means listening attentively, right? And yes, right, as we've explained, articulation is the clarity and effectiveness of expressing ideas, which is B, which is what all of you are getting. So great, congrats to each of you, and thank you for continuing to participate. Yeah. All right, so if you remember, we did that video of, a poor communication skills, and now we are going to watch another video of someone introducing a product by a person who naturally wasn't extremely articulate, but over a time became that. And this particular speech is actually regarded as a classic example of
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Macro 2007 keynote address.
So thank you. Thank you for coming. We're going to make some history together today. This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. And Apple has been, well, first of all, one's very fortunate if you get to work on just one of these in your career. Apple's been very fortunate. It's been able to introduce a few of these into the world. In 1984, we introduced the Macintosh. It didn't just change Apple, it changed the whole computer industry. In 2001, we introduced the first iPod. And it didn't just change the way we all listen to music. It changed the entire music industry. Well, today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things. A widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. And here it is. There we go, right there. And to unlock the phone, I just take my finger and slide it across. Boom. And this is the home screen of iPhone right here.
So let's take a quick pause and discuss as to why or what did you observe in this particular presentation by Steve Jobs about the launch of the iPhone. So go ahead and type in whatever you thought was kind of intriguing, interesting, the way he talked, the way he presented, the way he was there, launching the iPhone. What, in your opinion, struck you as, an amazing presentation, and why do you think it's still, after 18 years, still regarded as one of the best speeches in terms of how to engage the audience, right? Okay, so we got great explanation of a new thing, okay? His speech was plain, nothing like the upper class English speakers. I guess the main thing is, did he get his message across, right? Product was well presented, including its top features, and explained in a very simple language. Absolutely, right? That's the key. You need to use the language that allows you to connect with your audience, right? He's not only talking about features and phone, that's a revolutionary speech, absolutely. The way he was interacting and communicating, he was confident and he waited for people's cheer to get over. That's a good one, actually, Vaidehi, right? Is it possible due to a lot of practice? Yes, absolutely, right? I think, if I'm not mistaken, from what I've read, I think he practiced this speech for 2 days and kept on tweaking and changing it, right? So good to see a lot of you have some great ideas and great suggestions on why this is an exceptional speech, right? Okay, so yeah, as and I've probably watched this video like tens of times, many years, and every time I still get enthralled, and watch it, right? And this was obviously pretty earth-shattering in terms of this was the launch of the smartphone revolution. Post this, obviously Google had acquired Android, and the smartphone revolution pretty much took over the world. But if you look at his presentation, right from the very beginning, right, his first sentence actually is today we are going to make history together, right? And so the trick he's using is trying to talk about, today we are going to create history and we are going to go do it together, right? So he's engaging the audience into the launch of a new technology, right? And the way he goes about it is not saying, okay, today we are launching the iPhone. He talks also about how Apple as a company has over the years been at the forefront of innovating technology, right? And then he comes in with this trick of, we are introducing this product and this product and this product, making people think like, if you look at the launches or these kind of presentations which companies do, they are introducing many different products on the same day, right? On one big day, while he kind of brings in the audience with this particular skill. And obviously there are many others kind of tricks that he's used to kind of engage with the audience. Now again, I'm going to repeat this. What you have to realize is that Steve Jobs was naturally not an extremely articulate person. Even for this presentation, right? He spent days and days thinking through, practicing before he was able to do this presentation, right? So that's the good news for all of us, that we can hone our skills on this particularly very critical skill and get better at it, right? And then let me give you another good news, right? Which is the fact that, if you remember critical thinking, one of the mental models, right, that we talk about over there, which is referred to as the Pareto principle, right, or the 80-20 rule. Anybody knows what the 80-20 rule is? Yeah, so the good news for us is that, luckily for us, even in our lives, when we have to demonstrate good articulation skills, 80% of the times these events are going to be planned events. We won't have to demonstrate that we have great articulation skills like 100% of the time and be caught in surprising situation. That's not the case. Most of the times, right, we will know upfront that we have to do this presentation, we have to present our design, we have to do a demo for the vice president or the CEO or the visiting guest, right? So the good news is that 80% of the times where you have to demonstrate these skills are going to be planned events. And so you can plan for it, you can prepare for it, you can practice for these, right? And only 20% of them will be sudden situations, like when you are in a meeting and your boss turns around to you and asks, what do you think? right? That is like you had not planned for it. So you have to, on your feet, think about whatever thoughts that are in your brain. How do you put them into words, right? So and we'll talk about the unplanned events and other situations in the next semester. Today we are only going to be focusing on how do you prepare for these planned situations to make sure that you can demonstrate your skills of how well you kind of work with words. Yeah. All right, so let's move on. Let's take another quick pause for another quiz. So the question is, which of the following is an example of unplanned communication, right? Where you couldn't have planned for it and it suddenly springs up, right? Is it a prepared presentation, B, a job interview, C, a casual conversation with a friend, or D, a written report, right? Which circumstances is a good example of unplanned communication, right? Yeah, looks like everybody is getting it. The answer is C. Yeah, good. Okay, so continuing on, the good news is when you know that there are going to be planned events, right? Essentially, the way to think about it is that, okay, I need to prepare for this because I know about it. Then there is going to be this part where I'm actually going to be delivering either my presentation or a demonstration or whatever it is, right? And then there are some quick, simple things that I can do to improve myself after the event is done. And then we'll talk of some tips and tricks that you can use, right? So this is a very simple way of kind of looking at this fairly complex topic and making sure that you are ready for it, right? So just a quick refresher. I think in problem solving, we had introduced this concept, right? This tool, this breakdown that you are seeing of articulation into 4 subcomponents, right? Any of you remember what the tool is, or what is it called when you take something and try and kind of either categorize it or break it down into, 3, 4, 5, whatever it be, subparts, right? I think the people who would have attended the problem solving would know that, this is a mind map. So hopefully you guys are aware of it and start making it, a part of your daily life to always try and, use mind mapping as a good tool to take things which are in your mind and put them in a map, because the map will allow you to kind of traverse through and go to your final destination. So let's start with preparation, right? And we've kind of said, okay, in order for preparing, you can start by first is understand the goal, right? Understand why is it that you are doing this particular demo or presentation, right? Are you trying to inform people about something? Are you trying to persuade them towards something? Are you trying to inspire new joinees who've joined your company? Or are you just doing it, I don't know, for fun or to entertain, right? Whatever it is. It's very important to know exactly what your goal is, because depending on that, your presentation should flow, right? So, for instance, if you're going to be informing people using a lot of statistics or trends or facts in your presentation becomes important, right? If you're going to be persuading somebody, right, to go ahead with your suggestion, you want to try and strike some kind of an emotion with the audience, right? If you're trying to inspire, then you want to tell stories, right, about for instance, youth achieving something, or your vision of where you want the product to go, or how this feature is going to be so, big change for your customers, right? So it's very important first and foremost to make sure that you understand what is your goal, and we've just listed something or some options over here to make sure that once you know the goal, then you can plan your actual message, right? Then the next thing is that you need to understand the audience, right? It is very important for you to know if, for instance, let's just take a real life example, right? Let's say there's a hackathon in your company, you've done a demo. In order for doing the demo, you had done a presentation to convince the judges, and you got, your project got picked. Now, if the team or the location wants to showcase it, and when there is a visiting C-level person and you're going to do the same demonstration, what you need to realize is probably you'll have to shrink the demonstration, right? It'll have to be a quicker one. Then you are talking to the C-level, right? So the terms that you will use, the words that you will use may be very different, right? And all of this basically depends on, if you understand your audience, you are not going to be either over-explaining or under-explaining things, right? Your examples you might need to quote examples such that it strikes a chord with that audience, right? To kind of build connectivity and credibility, right? So, for instance, if you are talking to technology students, and you kind of start saying NLP, and ML and all of that, versus maybe if you are talking to the CEO of your company, which is non-technology, right, and you start throwing around these terms, that might not be a good way to go forward, right? So that's the second part of it. We talked about understanding the goals, then we went into understanding the audience, and then the third one is, what is the tone that you want to set, right? And the tone is kind of, how you speak, the excitement levels. It's kind of the underlying emotional undercurrent, right, of your talk. You need to know, is this a formal presentation or an informal one? Are you trying to be serious, or are you trying to be funny? Are you trying to be optimistic that good things are coming, or are you trying to say, this could be a problem, we might not be able to scale our software to this big sale day that is planned? So you need to understand the tone that you want to set, right? What is the mood, and how should the audience receive this? Because you don't want there to be like a mismatch, right? Which is, it's supposed to be a serious presentation, and you are trying to be, funny and talk of things which are not relevant, right? For instance, if you are doing a pitch about your startup, right, you need to be confident, you need to be upbeat, and you need to make sure that you are presenting data in short, crisp sentences, right? So that's kind of the tone related aspect. And then the final one is obviously understanding the topic, right? Because most probably you will be asked questions, right? And if you want to demonstrate your knowledge, why you are the one who's giving this presentation, right? There is kind of a rule of thumb that you should at least know 10x of what you are talking about to come across as being knowledgeable about the topic, right? As being the person who rightfully deserves to be presenting this, right? So on making sure that you understand the topic, you know the topic, you know what all you have tried, right, becomes extremely important. And 10x is a good rule to follow, because you don't want to get caught with questions which seem fairly basic, but you don't appear to be knowledgeable or prepared about it. So that's the first part of when you know that there is a planned event, what all you need to do to prepare, right? And obviously, practicing yourself, writing down. We'll get into that in one of the later presentations sessions that we do. But these are at least some of the very basic things you need to be sure you are prepared for. Yeah. So let's move on. Let's do a quick quiz. So, this question is again, what is the most important factor to consider when planning a presentation? Right? Remember, most, yeah? Because probably all of them might be important, but what becomes the most critical one? Is it the length of the presentation? Is it the number of slides, which is B? Or is it the audience's needs and interests, which is understanding the audience? Or is it D, the speaker's personal preferences, right? So yeah, obviously it is C, which is understanding the audience well, right? The other thing that we haven't really covered over here in terms of preparation, but we just kind of briefly, have talked about it a little bit here and there, is the fact that preparation also means that you actually prepare well for your presentation, right? You may actually want to, actually write down the whole presentation maybe a day or 2 days ago. You may want to create like a summary sheet, which you may have like flashcards that you carry with you when you are doing the presentation, in order to make sure that you do not forget any of the most important points, right? So you may want to use flashcards for that. You will need to, especially initially, till eventually it becomes a habit and you are confident, right? Practice in front of a mirror, probably even record yourself as you are speaking, watching the recording, understanding and realizing the mistakes that you might be making, and then practicing again, right? So these are all part of preparation, right? At least doing it 2 or 3 times before the final presentation initially, right, will help you kind of work and improve on this skill. Yeah. Okay, so now that you are prepared, let's kind of go into the main aspect, which is the procedure of actually giving that presentation, right? And here again, we've kind of come up with, I guess, about 8 different points. And let's start with the top right, which talks about making sure that you understood the cultural aspects, right? Making sure that you understand, once you know the audience, if there are any sensitivities that you need to plan for, right? For instance, right? This is a very common mistake that I have seen, right? We as Indians, when we are giving numbers, we talk of 3 lakhs or 7 lakhs, right? Now imagine if your audience is somebody from either the US, or you're talking to your customer in the US or Japan, right? Honestly, none of them know what lakh means or what is lakh, right? So being aware when you're using terms or terminology, right? Because these are cultural things. Because we use lakhs on a daily basis, right? Or crores, think that everybody knows it, but the whole world doesn't, right? So this is an example of being culturally sensitive, right? And make sure, for instance, whether you should use formal language or slang, right? Being aware, if it is a formal presentation, try not to use slang language where possible, right? The next one is contingency plan, right? You never know when things could go wrong, right? Especially in India, you're doing a presentation and suddenly the lights go off, right? Or your PowerPoint kind of crashes and you have tech failures, or suddenly you had planned for 20 minutes and because of things overrunning you are told that, well, it needs to be only 7 minutes, right? So always have a contingency plan. What will I do if this happens, right? Because you want to, again, if you've planned for it and if you are able to do it, it will show that you are composed, you are professional, right? And that becomes extremely important, right? If your PowerPoint crashes, don't panic, right? You need to be able to continue speaking, and that can only happen if you've practiced, if you know what those slides were saying, right? And if you kind of, like, let's say there was a very important point you need to make and you forget that, right? You can always kind of say, okay, let me kind of circle back to the previous slide, right? And here's something that I failed to mention, but I wanted to make sure you understood it, right? So that is how you kind of plan for contingencies. And then the next one is, always managing your time, right? And this is something that a lot of people fail on, right? So having checkpoints, right? So you know that, okay, by the 5th minute, I should be on my 3rd slide, right? Or having some kind of a rule of thumb that, okay, I have 8 slides and I'm going to be presenting for about 20 minutes. So I should spend about, 2 to 3 minutes per slide. Why is that important, right? Because respecting time is showing that you respect the audience, right? And so you shouldn't, for instance, if you have a 10-minute talk and you spend 6 minutes kind of introducing yourself and your team and your product, you're not leaving enough time for the right and important points, right? You want to leave some time at the end so that the audience can ask questions, right? So checking the progress is extremely important, right? And then comes, understanding the audience engagement, right? You always need to, and it's very difficult when you are doing it virtually. For instance, over here, I have no idea, honestly, how many of you are actually even paying attention or listening, and how many of you are tuned off or on your phones, right? But that's the reality of online. At least in the offline world, you get visual cues, right? You can see that your audience is not interested, it's not engaged, right? And you know that a disengaged audience is not going to retain your message, right? So you need to be able to know and figure out, right? So for instance, over here in this particular case, one of the ways we've tried to engage the audience is every 2 or 3 slides, we've just tried to put in a quiz so that people, kind of engage by, answering those questions. Or sometimes we would say, hey, can we have a quick show of hands, right? To know whether the people, and those are some tips or tricks that you can use to try and engage your audience, right? And then we already kind of talked about managing the time, and one way obviously was to have checkpoints on your progress, right? But making sure that you know how long each slide should be, making sure you have some buffer time built in, and all of these become extremely important. Again, remember, because we are trying to give a message that you are an extremely articulate speaker. Yeah, knowing the sequence, right? You need to know the flow. Again, this could be sometimes for handling as a contingency because something goes wrong, right? You want to make sure that your delivery is smooth and it's coherent, right? You don't want awkward silences, right? You don't want to be flipping through slides and skipping points. So making sure that at all times you are well prepared. Sometimes, you can use like acronyms, like if you remember the critical thinking, if we've already done it, right? We've at Satkaam come up with this acronym of what kind of things to do to avoid making mistakes, right? And so we have this acronym ABCDEF, right? So again, kind of making some things to engage with the audience and knowing the sequence becomes important, right? Then you go on to, you also need to be aware of what not to say, right? Like you shouldn't be saying, oh, I didn't have much time to prepare for this slide, so that's why my presentation is not going proper. Like, that's not a real thing to say. You are a professional in a company, this is a planned event, right? Whatever may be your excuse, but saying that, oh, I wasn't prepared, is actually you are digging a hole for yourself by saying that, I didn't take this seriously, right? Or saying things like, I'm not sure if this is interesting, right? So you don't want to sabotage your own talk, right? If things go wrong, try and recover gracefully, right? With professionalism, not like apologizing all the time. Over apologizing also is not a good thing, right? So remember this in terms of planning your time and all of that. So moving on, right, some things to remember with regards to when you are executing, right? You have to demonstrate energy, you have to demonstrate awareness of the audience, awareness of the engagement of the audience, whether they are understanding or not, and try and adapt, right? Try and change based on what you understood about the engagement of the audience, right? So those are, and we've listed down some quick tips, right, of figuring out, making sure you're always watching the clock, you're reading the room, your flow. You don't have to talk a lot always. In fact, if you looked at, or if you remember the Steve Jobs presentation, right, it wasn't like the security officer who came into the hospital and just, rambled for 2.5 minutes, right? Even Steve Jobs' presentation was the same, but if you look at the number of words, right, it was far fewer, but if you look at the impact of the presentation, obviously it was a lot more, right? So these are some things that you can do while you are executing. And let's take a quick pause over here to see, based on what we've covered so far, if you guys had any thoughts or questions or wanted to discuss, or us to, go a little bit deeper into, because this is obviously the most important part. Okay, so moving. So, we've covered quite a bit, and so I wanted to kind of take a quick pause. If you guys have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to type it in. I do see one over here that says, how to add that normal conversations with clients in that presentation to make a small connection and engagement. Yeah, so I think this is it's a very good question, especially, for instance, if you are visiting a customer or a customer is visiting you, right? And, before the kind of official presentation starts or before the meeting kicks off, it's a good habit to kind of, just go around shaking the hands of everybody who's there, introducing yourself, and then doing small talk, like, if you know that they've come from some other city, just asking them, how was your flight? Was things on time? Talking about the weather, probably talking about, a sports event. Like, those are very generic small talk conversations that can help you kind of, make a connection with them before, it just jumps straight into, and that's a much better way than jumping straight into like a formal presentation, right? So make that a habit, yeah. Okay, like for smartphone, I can say, oh, we are fatigued of that manual device instead of we got this extra smartphone smarter than most of us. Okay, yeah, I mean, hopefully that helped, right? What I was saying was even before or even afterwards, actually, once the meeting is done, right? It's always a good habit to kind of try to connect with the people who might be visiting, or if you are visiting them, right? Asking them, for instance, after the meeting is done, oh, would you have a recommendation? You know, we are visitors, we don't know this town. Would you have a recommendation for a good, you know, restaurant or whatever it is, right? So that way you kind of connect, and it helps, right? So both before and after. Obviously, if it's a very official visit and there's a presentation, you shouldn't be doing too much small talk in the middle, right, while the conversation is going on or while the presentation is going on. But definitely before or after is a good idea, or when you break for lunch or break for tea and trying to get to know them, right? Typical tendency is that we actually try to stick with our friends and go chat with our friends, but that really isn't a good sign. In fact, you know, you want to develop your network, you want to develop connections, you want to get outside your comfort zone, and thus talking to other people who you might not know, you know, is a good habit to form, so to say. So, okay. If we are in a situation that on the day of our presentation we got a point that was not included and we got to know just then, how can we overcome it? So I'm not sure, when you say when you got a point, was it that you forgot about researching it and so you don't know the details? Or it could even be, like I said, right, like, you know, you wanted in a particular slide, you wanted to make 4 key points, but you only made 3 and you forgot the 4th and you've moved on. I think if it's that situation, then you can definitely, you know, kind of say, oh, and I think I forgot to mention this, so let me just go back, right? It's okay to say that you forgot, it's okay to say you made a mistake and you want to go back because that's a critical point. If it's something that, you know, you weren't aware of at all and you don't have enough data, then I think, again, acknowledging that, you know, you were just made aware that you know, this particular point might be important in your analysis, but unfortunately, you know, you haven't considered it, and so in your next analysis you will definitely including it. So one of the things that we need to realize is that, you know, we all know, all of us are human beings, right? We all make mistakes, we forget things sometimes, and it is always in a professional setup better to acknowledge that mistake, better to accept that we forgot, right, than try to hide, or than try to lie, or than try to make up data, right? As professionals, it's always expected that you know, you are forthcoming and are honest and truthful about things. Yeah. Okay, how to deal with a client's complaint instead of over apologizing, right? So yeah, that is also a good point. So I think, as I said, you can apologize saying, you know, we realize as a company that you are facing some challenges with our technology or with our software product. We acknowledge that there are certain gaps, right? And we are taking the appropriate steps and measures to ensure that this does not repeat. We will be, you know, adding these additional steps to make sure that going forward from now on, when you receive our application or our software, you won't be facing the same problems or challenges that you have been till now, right? So that could be a good way of kind of putting it across, you know, in terms of making sure that you're not over apologizing, but confidently, you know, accepting the fact that you messed up and coming forward with the steps to make sure that those kind of problems don't repeat, right? Is it okay to, another language? So here's the deal. I think if in the room there is anybody, like let's say, you meet somebody who's from your hometown, or somebody who comes from, the same city that you grew up in. But the rule of thumb needs to be that if there is anybody else who does not understand that language, it is not a good habit to start conversing in your local language, right? You should always be aware that any conversation you are having in a business setting, when somebody else is around, is in a language that the other person will understand, right? Because otherwise it makes that other person who doesn't understand your local language extremely uncomfortable, because they don't know whether you are actually talking about him or her, right? So avoid talking in your local language when it is a professional setting, right? When you are out for a dinner or a casual conversation, or you're having a break at lunch and you are just mingling around, that time talking in your local language is okay, but ideally you should always talk in the professional language, right, which generally needs to be English. Okay. If it is correct to say, oh, I forgot to add one point today morning, say this instead of apology like a loser. Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's okay, I mean, to apologize or to say I forgot, or I mistook it, or I overlooked it. I think those things are fine, right? How to make our presentation more and more effective, Pranav? I mean, as I said, right, the best thing in all these skills, whether it is better decision making, whether it is critical thinking, whether it is articulation, whether it is problem solving, the more you do, the better you get at it, right? So as much as possible, trying to take up opportunities to put yourself, even for instance, a lot of people are fearful of presenting, right? There is something like a stage fright that exists, right? And the only way to overcome that is by practicing more, right? So if you are, if you know that, you are not a good presenter, right? The only way to get better at it is by practicing more, by raising your hand and asking your boss that, I want to work on this particular skill because it is a weak point for me. So can I get more opportunities to come and present in a team meeting, right? And then before that team meeting, practicing before the mirror, actually, writing down the whole presentation. You don't want to read the presentation when you're in front of people, but at least if you have a flashcard that have for each slide, what are the 3 or 4 points that you want to make sure you don't forget or miss, right? And having that flashcard, right? So for every slide, having a flashcard is a good idea as well, right? So hopefully those kind of answer some of the questions that you guys have. Thanks for those. Glad to see, people coming forward with these. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and continue. And if you have more questions, please let them come and we'll take them as I see them. Yeah. Moving on, remember we are talking about how to do well in your career, right? So let's talk about some of the things that you can do to keep getting better, right? Because we've talked about these skills which are very critical are things that you can learn. They are things that are compounding, which is the more you do, the more you practice, the better you get at it, right? And so the first thing you could do is, after you've done the presentation or the design discussion or a demonstration, try and collect feedback, right? Whoever you can approach, whether it is your lead, tech lead, or it is your boss, or it is your VP or manager, if you have the opportunity, try and ask for feedback after the event, right? Ask them, I'm trying to improve, because this is a weak skill for me. And hence, I would really appreciate if you could, answer or give me some feedback on, what went well. But more importantly, especially what can I do to make sure that the next time when I'm doing something like this, it can be better, right? So be selfish, always look for feedback, and try and work on those, right? To show up that you really care about this. We put in a jargon on purpose over here. Actually, we will circulate what are called as minutes of the meeting, right? Because you are delivering this, you will say these were the things that were discussed, these were the action items that were taken, and this is the plan or follow up that needs to happen. Even if this is not a part of kind of improving your articulation per se directly, right? Remember, you are trying to demonstrate professionalism. You're trying to demonstrate that you care. You're trying to demonstrate that you have a sense of ownership, right? It's not only, oh, I had to give a presentation, so I did that. After that, the project manager should be following up or something like that. If you start demonstrating these skills, right, you will get noticed, right? And if you get noticed, you will get more opportunities. And as you get more opportunities, you will get more time to practice. And as you get more time to practice, the better you will get at it, right? And then finally, push for these opportunities, right? As we said, right, if you get one particular opportunity, right, whenever there is another chance, right, or try and talk to your supervisor or your boss and say, I am trying to improve my skills on better communication or being more articulate, and hence I would like to get more chances to present in front of the team, maybe do more demos in a team setup, whatever it is. You are responsible for your career, and hence you will have to push for more opportunities with whoever it is that can provide you these, right? So moving on, let's take another quick quiz over here. Okay. So I guess the question is, which of the following tips can help improve articulation during a presentation? A, use as much as jargon as possible. B is speak faster to cover more material. C, use pauses to allow your audience to digest the information that you are sharing. Or D is avoiding to make eye contact, right? The correct answer is C, right? It is something that generally most people are extremely uncomfortable with, especially if you're presenting, right? But it is something that can be extremely powerful, and especially if you are sharing a lot of information with the audience, you want to try and make sure that they understand. I did want to take up, I saw a couple of comments being made. One was Chintan was saying that if our presentation is long, how can we catch the audience's attention, right? And I think in one of the future semesters, we will be talking about making effective presentations, right? There are some tips again or tricks that you can use, right? One is you always want to kind of keep the audience engaged, right? Because if you keep talking for too long of a time, it's very easy to have lost them, right? So either putting in stories, either putting in anecdotes, either sharing some, very good data that is interesting, either asking them questions, right? So doing that often is a way of kind of trying to engage the audience. Taking enough breaks. You can't just keep talking for too long. So taking a break as required is another good one. Right? Asawari was asking about, I have the fear of presenting something and what can I do to overcome it, right? So I'll give you my personal example, right? I personally used to be extremely scared of talking in front of even a group of 5 people, right? And today I don't have that challenge or issue, right? It has just come because I forced myself through different situations of either giving more presentations and practicing more and just doing it more number of times, and that's how I've kind of reached over here. So unfortunately the only way of getting over that is just more practice. So now let's move on to the final part, which is let's talk about certain tips or tricks that you can use, right? Obviously, especially in Eastern cultures and in India, for instance, a lot of us have stage fear, right? We are extremely scared of having 50 people in front of us and having to talk to the crowd, right? Now, one obvious way, and I'm saying this based on experience, I personally was somebody who would be shaken up if I had to even stand up and speak in front of 5 people, right? But thankfully, I kept practicing, and today, you put me up in a front of 200 people and I can talk for hours, right? So it's all a question of practice, right? One of the things that you could think about is if you look at each of us, we are all pretty good when we do a one-on-one conversation, right? When we are doing a one-on-one with one more person, we don't get stage fear. So one thing which you can try and train or trick your brain into is saying that, you know what, I'm not talking to 50 people. I am doing 50 one-on-ones, right? And so they often say that look at one person in the audience for like 2-3 seconds and then change your vision or gaze and look at somebody else and then look at somebody else. And if you're able to train your mind into saying, whoever you are looking at, you are doing a one-on-one with that person, that's a potential way of trying to overcome stage fear. Now, there are certain other tricks which we'll get to in a different presentation, but that's one quick thing that you can talk or you can think about, right? Knowing the presentation format template, we kind of covered this, right? But if you are doing it at your company, making sure right, what templates does the company use? If there's a new template, adopt that new template. Don't just go and use a standard white background, this thing for a company presentation, right? Presentation creation skills, right? This is a skill that you may want to work on. It's something that's on the side, but people who put together, right? Especially, we have a tendency of putting a lot of words on slides, right? And then actually a lot of people just read out the slides, right? Honestly, if I wanted to and you're submitting the slides, I'll just read your slides. I don't need you to read the slides or what's on the slide, right? So getting into this habit of having fewer words on your slides and then talking around those points is a good technique, right? And Steve Jobs was very famous for this, which is his slides had very few words on them, right? He would actually sometimes just have one. That was the slide. And then he would talk about the one thing, right? So these skills and observing people who are really good at it and figuring out how you create your slides becomes very, very important, right? We've kind of talked about prepared versus extempore, right? You need to know sometimes based on a question that somebody might ask, right? You may want to, either be prepared, or if you are not, right? And let's say somebody asks you a question and you are not sure, right? One thing you could try and do, right, is say, to buy you more time, is say, let me make sure that I've understood your question, right? So let me rephrase your question and kind of repeat it with different words, but in your head you are actually trying to think of what should be your response or what should be your answer, right? Another very famous trick a lot of people do use, right, when they are kind of having to think on their feet, is turn the question to the audience and say, oh, that's a very good question, let's see what does the audience think about this particular question, and then I will give you my thoughts, right? Especially experts kind of try and do that a lot. So those are kind of, if you have to be extempore. And then planning, when you are planning, right, to make sure that your start, right, you want to start by engaging with the audience. And we'll again, in one of the future sessions, we'll talk about tips that you can use to make a strong start, right, by either telling a story or giving some stats or asking questions, right? So have a strong start. Make sure that in the middle, because that's where typically you tend to lose your audience, right? Because people tend to just ramble on and on and on. So making sure that you are engaging, and in the end, always make sure that you summarize, right? So that's a good way of kind of thinking about your overall presentation with regards to certain tips. And as I said, we will have more sessions in the other semesters where we'll specifically try and go into some of these. Yeah. So moving on, again, let's take a quick pause with this quiz and see what you guys think. So the question is, when preparing for a planned presentation, which factor is the most important according to what we've talked about today? Is it the length of the presentation, which is important? Is it the visual aids that you used? Or is it knowing the goal of your presentation? Or where and what is the venue of the presentation? Again, the most important factor, right? Yep, looks like most people are getting it. It indeed is knowing the goal, right? Remember, we had said knowing the goal, knowing the audience, knowing the topic. Those three become super, super critical if you want to make an effective presentation. Okay, so we've done this one, and just to keep you guys still awake, we are going to do one more Q&A before we kind of move towards the end and wrap this up. So what do you guys think about this question? So the question is, what should you do if you encounter an unplanned situation, right? So you're doing a presentation and then something goes wrong, right? Or somebody asks a question that you were not expecting, right? So you can either panic and start speaking quickly, or you can validate your understanding and take a pause, or you can just ignore the question that the audience has asked, or you can change the subject, right? Just move on to something else, right? I think because we were going on a string of C's, we've changed the answer over here to say it is B, which is validate your understanding and take a pause, right? If you're not sure, stop and think and pause, to make sure you are not panicking and letting it go off the tracks. Okay, so having done this, as I said, we are kind of moving towards the end, right? And remember what we've talked about, right? We started with saying, what is the difference between communication and articulation? Why is articulation important? Luckily for us, most of the times where we have to demonstrate this skill, these are planned events, so we can prepare. right? And if you look at this, essentially it's saying the most important is the planning aspect, right? Which you will know beforehand, right? Knowing the audience, knowing the topic, knowing the goal, right? And then the execution becomes extremely important. And then finally some, additional things that we've talked about. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time over here, in fact, on these slides, because we've kind of covered the key aspects. And then this is kind of, if you were to kind of do a one-page takeaway, right? Some more additional things, right? Your voice, right? Make sure you have a good command of, the topic, not only the topic, but the words that you're using. Your voice is steady, not shaky, right? You've done your research. Try and avoid too many I statements, right? I did it, for instance, when I wanted to give you the example, because it is a personal example of practice to get over stage fear, right? But generally avoid too many I statements. Always kind of observing the audience, looking at, their facial expressions, the start, middle, and end, and so on. So this is, and then we've also talked about vocabulary, right? You don't need to use very high funda words to sound impressive, right? You can keep simple terms, simple words, and still be able to get your message across, right? The next one that's very, I think a lot of us struggle with is having a pause, right? We are extremely uncomfortable, most of us, when we are speaking, because we think if we pause or if we stop, that's sending this signal that, oh, I am nervous and I've forgotten, right? In fact, generally pauses are seen with both people, either very nervous people or very confident people who know their topic well and are extremely articulate, right? So remember, we want to move from this nervous person to a strong, confident, articulate person, right? So get comfortable. It is okay for us to speak slowly, because it is more important to be understood than to finish fast, right? And so pauses, whether it is 5 seconds or 8 seconds, it's okay, right? So remember that. And with that, I want to kind of end with this. There's a beautiful YouTube video of about 15 minutes where the link is given over here, where where the person is asked on why should you be articulate, right? And as we've said, for us, we do believe that irrespective of the role you are playing, this particular skill is super critical. And the first thing to start with is not kind of ignoring other people who are good at it by saying, oh, he's a salesperson, so only a salesperson needs to be very presentable and very articulate, right? First thing to do is understand that irrespective of the role, to succeed in your career, you need to be good. And so this is just a video on why should you be articulate that I would recommend you to watch. Hopefully, as we've kind of covered, you've kind of realized that this is a very important skill. The good news again is this is a skill you can learn. This is a skill that can be practiced. And this skill, the more you practice, the better it will be. It will give you compounding skills, and it will set you up, whether you want to start your own company, or you want to succeed in your corporate life, or you want to be an interesting individual that people love to talk to. You learn this skill, you master this skill, and you become really good at it, right? So let's end this and let's pause again and have a quick summary or discussion based on whatever you guys think, have questions or want to discuss more. So thank you. All right, so I think that's all that we had on this particular topic. I'm going to be here for a couple more minutes. People who want to hang up, feel free to drop off. People who might have questions or wanted to talk about something, feel free to type it into the chat window, and I would be more than happy to answer. I do want to take again this time to appreciate and thank each and every one of you, because after all, it is a Saturday, it is afternoon time, right after lunch. Isn't easy to kind of keep listening in to lectures when you've done it the whole week. So yeah, whoever has a question, please feel free to go ahead and ask it over here. Right. About the Google Form exam, yeah, I mean, I'll share the link after this. Feel free to click on it and answer the question. Should be very simple and straightforward questions, I would think. Some of the colleges do track it religiously and use whether you finished the quiz or no as kind of marking you for attendance. We just provide the weekly, results to them. So please make sure you do that, even if your college isn't marking it, right? Yeah, I think mobile gamer. You said you had a question. Okay, Rishikesh has. If we forget or can't recall any point of the presentation, what would we say in this situation? If we forgot or can't recall any point, right? So that's the reason, as I said, right? For every slide, if you have a flashcard in front of you, right? And the flashcard shouldn't have what you are going to speak, but just the 2 or 3 points that you want to make sure that you address when you are talking, right? That's one way of kind of doing it so that you don't forget. And it's better, than what most people do, as I said, which is actually just write the whole thing on the slide and then stand up and read it, right? That's not a good idea. So if you practice, there is a chance that you will not forget. If you write the whole speech generally and you practice it, there's a chance you won't forget. If you have a flashcard with you with the 2 or 3 points, there's a chance you won't forget. So those could be some of the tricks that you use, right? On which sessions the questions will be based in the exam. So let me be clear. There is obviously after each session we are doing like a continuous evaluation, and then I believe from next week there is a midterm which is mandatory for some colleges and optional for some colleges. The quiz will be across all the topics that we have covered till date. I believe that's about 8 weeks, so 8 sessions. So the questions will cover all the 8 topics. They will be multiple choice only, because that makes it easier for us to evaluate, but it will cover all the topics that we've done so far. Okay. Mobile gamer, what do you after being intermediate in English, still I find out understanding English of the English speaking people difficult because they speak very fluently but fast. What shall I do? There are no real live captions. Yeah, that's a good point. Again, one thing that you could do, as I said, for everything in life, pretty much, right, everything boils down to the same answer, right? Which is, if you are not comfortable, if you're not able to understand it, you watch more English series, right? So watch more YouTube videos, watch more Netflix shows, watch them without captions, and within a few months of watching a lot of them, you will realize that you are able to follow. Now there could be accent related differences, right? Like the American accent versus the Australian accent versus the British accent, that could throw you off. But again, in the end, it just boils down to the more you listen to, the better you will get at. So instead of watching something else that you are more comfortable with and what is more entertaining, try and watch something which may not be entertaining but is helping you grow, right? If you're new to the audience, for example, like hackathon PowerPoint presentation, how to prepare for this, yeah, I mean, the preparation should be the same. The only thing is, obviously, if the audience doesn't know you, you may want to take half a minute or so introducing yourself or introducing your team or giving a background so that they are aware of who you are, what your team has done, right? And again, it depends on, obviously, if it's a large audience, you can't be asking, them to introduce yourself. But if you're in front of 4 or 5 people and you don't know them or they are new, and you do have time, like 20 minutes or 25 minutes, you could try and strike up a conversation or have them introduce themselves as well, right? As I said, I mean, difference between articulation and communication, all of us can communicate, right? But all of us are not articulate, right? Communicating means the ability to send signals that could be non-verbal or send messages via verbal communication, right? Articulate people are the people who are able to make sure that whatever they are thinking, whatever is in their brain, whatever are their thoughts, they are able to express them in words such that the audience who is listening to them can understand very well what the person is speaking, right? So for instance, one exercise that you can do to try and become an articulate person, right? Take a topic that you are really good at, right? I don't know, if you are a, whatever, CS major, you might want to, take, the internet, right? And now, can you explain the internet to your 5-year-old niece? Can you explain what the internet is to your 50-year-old uncle who lives in the tier 3 city or is in a village? Can you explain the internet to your 80-year-old grandparent, right? Same topic. If you know it well, you will have to use different ways, different words, different examples to make these people who come from a very different background understand the same thing, right? So that's a very good way of trying to practice, right, becoming an articulate person. So hopefully that kind of answers the question. I think I have kind of covered almost everything that I saw, and it's good to see so many questions come through. So anyways, I think that's all, guys. Again, thank you for listening in and have a great rest of the weekend. People who are interested, please try and make sure you take the quiz. Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.